I jolted awake when the phone rang for the third time. 3:12 a.m. The red digits glowed in the dark like a warning flare. I reached for the receiver with a hand that trembled more from old memories than age. "Mrs. Coleman?" The voice on the other end crackled, uncertain. "This is Ochsner Medical Center in New Orleans. I'm sorry to call so early, but there's a patient here. He says his name is Isaac Coleman, and he's asking for his mother." I blinked hard. "You've made a mistake," I said, my voice clipped but calm. "My son's name was Isaac Coleman. He died 31 years ago. You've got the wrong family." I didn't mean to sound cold. It was the only way I knew how to survive moments like these. "I understand, ma'am," the voice said gently, "but I don't know who he is," I cut in, "but he's not my son." And with that, I hung up. My hand stayed on the receiver. The room was silent again, save for the faint buzz of the fridge in the kitchen and the low ticking of the clock on the wall. Then the phone rang again. I stared at it, frozen. 3 rings, 4. I picked it up on the 5th. "Mrs. Coleman, I apologize," the nurse said, patient but persistent. "I wouldn't have called back unless I truly believed there was something important here. He mentioned your name, your full name, and said you lived in Savannah, Georgia. He said he's been looking for you for years." My breath caught. "You said his name is Isaac?" I asked quietly, my voice trembling despite myself. "Yes, ma'am, Isaac Coleman. He's about 49, said he remembers your eyes, your voice, and he has a birthmark, a small star-shaped one, behind his left ear." The receiver slipped from my fingers again. That birthmark. Only he and I had ever known about it. Even the police hadn't asked about it when they recovered the body. It wasn't in the reports, not in the photos, but I remembered it. I used to kiss that little star-shaped patch of skin every night before tucking him in. I reached down with shaking fingers, picked the phone back up. "I'm coming," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Take your time, ma'am, we'll keep him safe." But I couldn't take my time. Time had taken everything from me, my son, my family, my peace. And now it had given me a chance I never dared to dream of, a chance to see if this impossible thing could be true. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed. My eyes drifted to the framed photograph on the nightstand. Isaac, 10 years old, wearing his red track jersey, grinning with all his teeth. That was the last clear image I had of him, the last time I remember feeling whole. "Isaac?" I whispered again, and the name felt strange in my mouth, like trying to say a prayer in a language I'd long forgotten. I stood and walked across the room. The house creaked beneath me. Old wood, like old bones, always remembers. I opened the closet and pulled out a small suitcase never used. I packed with slow, careful hands. A fresh blouse, slacks, my church shoes, toothbrush, that old silk scarf Isaac had given me for Mother's Day when he was 7. I didn't know what to bring to meet a ghost. Before leaving, I walked into the kitchen and turned on the small lamp by the sink. I made a pot of coffee, not because I needed it, but because it gave my hands something to do. On the counter sat the same ceramic mug I used every morning for 30 years. It read "Hasson, Mom," faded and cracked. I hadn't thrown it away, couldn't. I sat down at the table, the same one we used to sit at for Saturday pancakes. The same one I sat at the day the police called and said they'd found a body. I had cried until the wood beneath my elbows was soaked. That day, the world had ended quietly. Now it was whispering it might not have ended at all. I didn't cry this time. Not yet. There was a stiffness in me, like my body knew not to believe what my heart wanted. I called Cheryl, my daughter, but it went straight to voicemail. I thought of leaving a message, but what could I say? "Your brother might be alive," would sound like something pulled from a bad soap opera. I decided I'd tell her in person. When I knew for sure, I fed my cat, pulled on my coat, and stepped out into the Georgia night. The drive to New Orleans would take nearly 10 hours. 10 hours to wonder, 10 hours to remember every moment I had with Isaac, every mistake I made, every night I cursed God, then begged him to undo it. 10 hours to face the impossible. But I didn't hesitate. I filled up my tank at the gas station on Highway 17, where the night clerk called me Miss E, like he always had. I nodded and smiled, trying to keep the storm inside from spilling out. By 4 a.m., I was on the interstate. No traffic, Just me, the hum of the engine, and a past I had spent 3 decades trying to survive. Somewhere past the state line, the sun began to rise, casting soft gold across the dashboard. I reached over and turned on the radio, static. Then a song broke through Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On." Isaac had loved that song. I smiled, then cried. Not because I believed it yet, not fully, but because hope is a dangerous thing when you've been alone too long, and I wasn't ready to let it go. The sky was steel gray the day we buried him. Not storming, not weeping, just cold, dry, and wrong. I remember standing at the edge of the plot in Magnolia Hills Cemetery, clutching my sister's hand so tightly I left little crescent moons in her skin. The preacher was saying something I don't remember what. I just remember thinking, this doesn't feel real. There was a closed casket. The authorities had recommended it, given the state of the body they said they found. I never saw his face, never got to kiss his forehead one last time. They told me it was better that way, Kinder. They found the body in a wooded area outside Augusta weeks after he'd gone missing. Clothes torn, no identification. They claimed it matched Isaac's height, weight, age. Said they'd found DNA from me on a hairbrush in our home and partial matches on the remains. Partial, but not complete, not confirmed. I should have demanded more. Should have screamed. Should have asked harder questions. But by then, I had run out of breath. People came to the funeral in their Sunday best. Neighbors, church folk, his old school principal. They brought casseroles and condolences. I don't remember eating. I just remember the way my heels sank into the muddy grass. I wore a navy blue dress. Isaac had hated that dress, called it too old ladyish when I wore it to his 3rd grade parent-teacher meeting. He was always so proud when I dressed up, liked it when I wore bright colors. He said I looked like the sunrise in Peach. But that day, I wore navy and a veil, because I needed to hide. I stood there, listening to them lower the casket. And something in me stayed silent. A mother knows, and in that silence, that absence of connection, I felt it. This wasn't him. Cheryl, my daughter, was 16. She stood beside me, dry-eyed and stiff. Her grief was hard and private, like stone. She believed the body, believed the science. Said goodbye without looking back. I tried to. I really tried. I placed that silk scarf, the one he gave me when he was 7, on top of the coffin before they covered it with dirt. I whispered, "Sleep well, baby." But my heart didn't believe it, and still, the days went on. I went back to work 2 weeks later. I was a secretary at a small accounting firm then. The first morning I walked in and everyone went quiet. Carla brought me coffee without asking. Mr. Reeves offered to reduce my hours. I said no. If I stopped moving, I'd drown. The first year, I set his place at the table every night. Habit, I told myself. Not hope. But I never could bring myself to box up his room. I vacuumed it once a week, washed the curtains, fluffed the pillows. Every Christmas, I put up the little tree he'd begged for when he was 10, the one with the uneven legs and the missing star. Eventually, people stopped bringing it up. They stopped asking how I was, started talking about him in past tense. Wasn't he so good at track? He used to make the best grilled cheese. Such a sweet boy, your Isaac. Used to. Was. I smiled politely, nodded, and died a little each time. There was a detective, early on, Detective Rivas. He had doubts, like me. Said it didn't sit right. Said the decomposition didn't match the timeline. Said the woods were too clean for a child to have been lying there for months. But eventually, even he stopped calling. Files were closed, budgets ran out, priorities shifted. Only I kept believing something had been missed. And then time did its thing. Years blurred, memories softened, pain dulled, not gone, just muted. Like background music you forget is playing. I retired at 58. Cheryl moved to Atlanta. I joined a church book club and started volunteering at a senior center. I learned to fill my days, but nights were still long. And every time I heard a story about missing children, about mistaken identity, about miracles, I listened harder than I should. And now, 31 years later, the phone had rung. A voice had said Isaac's name, had described a birthmark I'd never told another soul about. It felt like God had finally spoken after 3 decades of silence. But it also felt like a second funeral waiting to happen. As I drove down I-65, the memories of that first funeral stayed with me like ghosts in the back seat. I kept replaying that moment standing at the grave, thinking, this isn't him. What if I had been right all along? What if that small voice, that whispering doubt, had been truth? What if my son had never been dead? I didn't let myself believe fully yet, not out loud, not even in my own head. Because what if I got there and it wasn't him? What if this was a man with a scar and a story and a terrible, painful coincidence? But that birthmark, you can't fake a mother's memory. And in the quiet hum of the highway, I whispered to myself, if it's him, I'll know. If you also feel the loneliness and hope of this mother, give her a like and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Who knows, someone nearby might be silently sharing the same emotions with you right now. The sunrise broke open in the distance, and I reached for the scarf in the passenger seat, the one he gave me with his sticky, 7-year-old hands wrapped around a crumpled Mother's Day gift bag. I tied it around my neck, like armor. I was going to meet the ghost I had buried. And I wasn't sure if I was more afraid of him being real or not. By the time I crossed the Alabama state line, the sun had fully risen. The world looked too ordinary for what I was carrying inside me. Trucks rumbled down the interstate. Billboards for diners and tire shops flashed by, but I was somewhere else entirely stuck between two lifetimes, one where my son was dead and one where he was waiting for me. The drive from Savannah to New Orleans is just under 10 hours if you don't stop much. I'd made it in a little over 9. No music, no calls, just the steady hum of the engine and the storm in my chest. I passed signs for Mobile and Biloxi without remembering a mile of it. My eyes stayed fixed ahead, my hands gripping the wheel as though I could steer my way back in time. I stopped just once at a Waffle House off exit 37. I wasn't hungry, but I needed to sit still, to breathe. The waitress was a young thing, no older than 20, called me ma'am twice, and asked if I wanted my coffee black or with cream. I chose black. I didn't have the energy for softness. As I sat there, I looked around at the other customers. A man in a construction vest, scrolling through his phone, a mother with 2 kids, one banging a spoon against the table, the clatter, the movement, it all felt so far away, like I was behind glass. The waitress brought my plate, eggs, grits, toast I didn't ask for. I forced down 3 bites. My hands shook. I thought of Isaac, 8 years old, dunking toast in syrup and grinning through missing teeth. He used to mix his grits with jelly, said it tasted like summer. I'd scolded him for it once, and he'd looked so wounded that I never said a word again. I left cash under the plate and got back in the car. No need to draw it out. The last hour of the drive was the longest. New Orleans unfolded like a dream I couldn't wake from, familiar but strange, beautiful but bruised. I hadn't been here in over a decade. Isaac's father and I came once, in '87, before he left. The city had music in its bones and sorrow in its corners. Even now, it hummed with memory. Ochsner Medical Center was a white and gray complex near the river, tucked between highways and residential blocks. I pulled into the visitor lot just after 1:30 p.m., heart pounding so hard I thought it might drown out the sound of my own breath. I sat in the car for a full 10 minutes before opening the door. Inside, the hospital smelled like bleach and something faintly sweet, maybe citrus cleaner. The air conditioning was too cold. My shoes clicked against the tile as I approached the front desk. "Excuse me," I said to the woman behind the glass. "I'm here to see a patient, Isaac Coleman." She typed something into her computer, glanced at the screen. "And you're his mother," I said. The words left my mouth before I could think about them. They didn't feel real. Not yet. Not until I saw him. She nodded. "Room 427 East Wing. Take the elevators down the hall to your right." I thanked her and followed the signs. Each step closer made my legs feel heavier. I touched the scarf around my neck for strength. It still smelled faintly of lavender, my perfume, the one Isaac used to say reminded him of cookies. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. I stepped out and turned down the hall. At the end was a room with the door slightly ajar. A nurse stood outside, chart in hand. She looked up as I approached. "Mrs. Coleman?" I nodded. "He's awake," she said gently. "Still a bit disoriented, but he's calm. You can go in when you're ready." I wasn't ready, but I nodded again and pushed the door open. The room was quiet. A heart monitor beeped steadily. The curtains were drawn, filtering sunlight into soft golden slants across the bed. And there he was. A man in his late 40s, lean, pale, short-cropped hair flecked with gray. A faint scar ran along his jaw. His eyes were closed, his face still. He didn't look like the boy I lost, but there was something in the shape of his mouth, in the slope of his nose. My breath caught. I took one step closer, then two. His eyes opened slowly. They were brown deep, warm, familiar in a way that made my knees go weak. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I know you." My heart stuttered. "I don't know how," he continued, voice hoarse, "but I know your eyes." Tears blurred my vision. "I'm Esther," I said. "I'm your mother." His face changed just slightly. Like a chord had been struck in a song he hadn't heard in decades. "I've dreamed of that name," he whispered. "Esther." I stepped forward and sat on the edge of the chair beside his bed. My hand reached for his before I could stop it. He didn't pull away. "I don't remember everything," he said quietly. "I remember being small, a song, a room with stars on the wall, and someone holding my hand, telling me I was safe. That was me," I said, voice trembling. He looked at me for a long time. "I think I believe you." I smiled through my tears. "That's enough. For now." Outside, the world moved on, but in that moment, for the first time in 31 years, time stood still. The room smelled of disinfectant and something else sterile, still, like time had paused here long before I arrived. Isaac's hand was warm in mine, bony but real. I kept my eyes on his face, afraid that if I looked away for even a second, he'd vanish again. "You said you remember stars," I whispered, unsure if I was speaking to the man or the child inside him. He nodded slowly. "Glow in the dark, on the ceiling." I covered my mouth. The stars had been his idea. He'd saved up allowance money and bought them from a scholastic book fair. I helped him stick them to the ceiling above his bed, one by one. He used to fall asleep counting them, his tiny voice murmuring, 32, 33. Only Isaac would remember that. My Isaac. The nurse returned a few minutes later, clipboard in hand. Her voice was calm, efficient. "We're still running blood work," she said. "His vitals are stable. Physically, he's healthy, aside from some signs of malnutrition and fatigue." She looked at me then. "We do have a social worker and a trauma specialist on staff. His memory loss appears to be partial. He remembers names, flashes, but not the timeline or where he's been." "Ah. Does he remember being taken?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. Isaac's eyes flicked between us. He didn't speak. The nurse's lips pressed into a gentle line. "We're not pushing him. That kind of recall needs to come in its own time. For now, familiarity is the best medicine." She left us alone again, and silence settled like dust. "I was scared of the dark," Isaac said suddenly. "You used to leave the hallway light on." My breath hitched. "Yes. You'd cry if the door closed all the way." "And you'd sing," he added. "That Marvin Gaye song." "What's going on?" I whispered, and his eyes lit up, just slightly. "I don't remember faces," he said, "but I remember your voice." I pressed his hand to my cheek. Then, without thinking, I asked, "Can I see it?" He looked puzzled. "The birthmark," I clarified, "behind your left ear." He tilted his head slightly, and I stood. Gently, I brushed aside the collar of his hospital gown. My breath caught. There it was, a small, faded star, lopsided, just like I remembered. I closed my eyes and let the tears come. "You're real," I said. "So are you," he replied softly. A doctor came in later, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and tired shoulders, Dr. Patel. He explained that the hospital had notified local law enforcement, who in turn flagged Isaac's name in a decades-old missing persons report. That report had been marked closed in 1997, when the presumed body was found. "But there was never conclusive identification," he noted, glancing at his clipboard. "No fingerprints. DNA testing wasn't as advanced back then, and it looks like no dental records were available." I nodded slowly. "They told me it was him." I wanted to believe it, because not believing would have torn me apart. He gave me a measured look. You might have been right all along, Mrs. Coleman. Isaac shifted in bed, his eyes darting to the window. Dr. Patel continued. We've sent out a request for expedited DNA testing just to confirm. It should take a few days. But he remembers me, I said, with more edge than I intended. I believe you, the doctor said calmly. We just want to make it official, for everyone's sake. He excused himself, leaving us once again with the quiet hum of machines and the occasional soft footstep in the hallway. Around 5, a tray of food arrived. Chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, a roll. Isaac poked at the chicken but didn't eat much. I cut it into smaller pieces like I used to when he was small, and he smiled a flicker, then gone. Do you remember the lake house? I asked, trying to unlock another corner of his memory. His brow furrowed. A red canoe? I gasped. Yes, baby, you tipped it over your first time out. You were 6. His hand twitched in mine. I don't know where I've been, he murmured, but I know I've been gone a long time. I don't think they let me talk about home. I think I was told not to remember. The words hung between us, heavy and sharp. I didn't ask more. Not yet. Instead, I brushed his hair back and said, You're safe now. We have time. We'll find the rest of the story together. He looked at me, truly looked, and said, Do I still have a room? I choked on a laugh. Yes, and it's exactly how you left it. His lip trembled, and I saw the boy I'd buried in the face of the man before me. Later, a nurse offered to move me to a visitor's room, but I refused. I sat in the chair beside his bed all night, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of sleep. At one point, around 2 a.m., he murmured, They took my name. I leaned in. Who did? But he was already asleep again. Outside, the city glowed through the curtains. I watched the lights flicker like stars and waited for morning, for answers, for the pieces of my boy to return. By morning, the light in the hospital room had softened into that pale golden hue you only find in quiet places, funeral homes, chapels, or places like this, where the air hangs thick with what's unsaid. Isaac was still asleep, his chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths. I hadn't slept at all. I sat beside him, staring at the ceiling, counting the rhythm of the monitor like it was the beat of my own heart. They took my name, he'd said. The words clung to me like morning dew on an old window pane. Who were they? My mind spun down every dark path imaginable. Kidnapping, trafficking, brainwashing. None of it made sense, and all of it did. I'd spent 31 years imagining horrors worse than death. Now every possibility came back to knock on the door of my heart. At 6:15 a.m., a young nurse named Leah brought me coffee and a small paper tray of breakfast. She was kind, early 20s, soft eyes, curly hair tucked into a ponytail. You didn't sleep? She asked gently. I shook my head. Not yet. She looked toward Isaac, still motionless in the bed. He mumbled in his sleep a few times. I heard home and hide. Could be memory fragments. Or trauma, I added. She nodded. Probably both. Leah gave me a kind smile and turned to leave, but then paused. Oh, there's a detective downstairs. Asked for you. He said he's with the New Orleans PD, reopening the old missing persons file. My throat tightened. Thank you. Detective Alex Bourne was waiting in the family conference room, gray slacks, rolled-up sleeves, and tired eyes that had seen too much. He looked to be in his mid-50s, with a calm demeanor and a voice like gravel soaked in warm bourbon. Mrs. Coleman, he said, standing to shake my hand. I've read your file more times than I can count. Up thin is. My file? I asked, easing into the chair across from him. Your son's disappearance, he clarified. I wasn't on the original case back then. I was still in uniform patrol, but I remember it. Savannah PD sent everything they had. Now it's our turn. He flipped open a thin manila folder. We're getting a fresh DNA analysis. Should have confirmation within 72 hours. But from what I hear, we already know. I said nothing. He pulled out a photocopy of the original missing person poster. Isaac, age 10. A school photo, big eyes, lopsided grin. It was like looking at a ghost that had been waiting to speak. Mind if I ask about yesterday? He said. Anything he said? I hesitated, then repeated. They took my name. That's all. He remembers my voice, The stars on his ceiling, the smell of lavender, but not where he's been. Bourne nodded slowly. That kind of language. It suggests identity suppression. That's common in long-term captivity cases, especially when the captors want control. Captors. Hearing the words said out loud felt like someone had knocked the air out of me. I didn't. I never let myself believe he was taken. Not truly. I thought maybe he ran, got lost, got hurt. Sometimes, Bourne said gently, believing the worst is the only way to survive. He closed the file. We're going to find out what happened to him. You have my word. When I returned to the room, Isaac was awake. He looked more alert, his eyes tracking me as I entered. Did you go somewhere? He asked. I nodded. Just down the hall. I met a detective. He wants to help us figure things out. He looked down at his hands. Is there a reason I don't know who I am? I sat on the edge of the bed. We don't know yet, but we'll get there, together. He looked at me again, and something flickered behind his eyes. Fear, maybe, or a memory. There was a woman, he whispered. Blonde. She used to call me Caleb. She said Isaac was a bad name, said it was tied to bad people. My skin prickled. Where were you? He shook his head. I don't know. A house. Big. Remote. Cold. Even in summer. There were other kids, but I don't remember their names. My heart clenched. He continued. We weren't allowed to talk about before. She said that part of our lives was gone. Dead. My fists curled. How long were you there? I asked. He shook his head again. Years. Maybe all of them. I don't know. Time didn't exist. Tears burned behind my eyes. But I remembered you, he said. Your voice, the stars, the smell of cookies on Saturday mornings. That's all I needed to hear, I said, my voice trembling. He reached for my hand and held it tightly. Will you stay? He asked. Always. That night, after visiting hours ended, I convinced the nurse to let me stay one more night. I curled up in the recliner by his bed, the same scarf still tied around my neck. I watched his chest rise and fall, listened to the steady beeping of machines. In the dark, Isaac spoke again, soft, almost sleep-talking. She said my mother gave me away, because I was broken. I sat up straight. Who said that? I whispered. But he was asleep again, lost in whatever nightmare held him. I wiped my eyes and stared out the window, where the stars above New Orleans shimmered like promises still waiting to be kept. The next morning, Isaac woke before I did. I stirred in the recliner to the sound of the nurse checking his blood pressure, but Isaac's voice pulled me from sleep completely. I dreamed of a red sweater, he said. You were knitting it and I was sitting on the floor with a book. I sat up, rubbing my neck. That happened. You were 9. I was making it for your birthday, and you got mad because you thought it was for Cheryl. He smiled just a little. I guess it wasn't all lost then. No, baby, I said softly. Not all. After breakfast, we were taken to a private conference room. A social worker named Doreen met us there, soft-spoken, middle-aged, with a kind face lined by years of listening. She sat across from us, folded her hands gently, and said, Isaac, can I ask you a few questions? You don't have to answer anything you don't want to. He nodded. Do you remember any names besides your own? People you lived with? He hesitated. There was a woman. She was strict, controlling, always smelled like peppermint and smoke. Her name was Marlene. My body tensed. I didn't know a Marlene, but that name, harsh, clipped it lodged in my chest like splinters. She used to say we were chosen, he continued, staring at his hands. Said the world had given up on us, and she had saved us, that we owed her. How many of you were there? Doreen asked gently. 4. Maybe 5 at one point. We were all given new names. She said names held too much pain. Mine was Caleb. Did you go outside? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Isaac shook his head. Not much. Sometimes at night. Never alone. We weren't allowed to talk to anyone. No TV, no radio. She kept a Bible by the door, but she used it to scare us, not comfort us. He looked up at me. She said I was sick, that I needed to be purified. I couldn't speak. I just reached for his hand and held it like I could protect him from everything that had already happened. Doreen's expression never changed, but I could see her eyes darken. "She isolated you," she said softly. "That's a tactic. Psychological conditioning. It keeps victims dependent." Victims. I hated the word. And yet, I knew it was true. "She said my real mother was ashamed of me," Isaac whispered. "That she gave me away." My throat burned. "That's a lie. I never gave you up. You were taken from me." "I know that now," he said. "I think I always knew." After Doran left, Detective Bourne returned. "We flagged the name Marlene in our system," he said, standing at the foot of Isaac's bed. "There are several aliases tied to missing children cases, mostly in the South. No convictions, some leads. Slippery." He handed me a printed photo, a woman in her 50s, with a hard mouth and pale, distant eyes. The name listed Marlene Brooks, a.k.a. Lisa Keller, a.k.a. Maureen Abbott. "Does she look familiar?" he asked Isaac. Isaac stared at the photo for a long time. Then he nodded. "That's her." My hands shook as I handed the picture back. "We've got a task force reviewing cold case files," Bourne continued. "We think your son may not be the only child she took. There could be others still out there." "Still out there?" The idea hit me like a wave. "Is she dangerous?" I asked. He hesitated. "We think she's been operating under religious cover, posing as a home for troubled youth. No official registry, no tax records, just whispers in abandoned counties." "Why hasn't she been caught?" Isaac asked, his voice low. "Because no one knew where to look," Bourne said. "Until now." Later that afternoon, Cheryl arrived. She walked into the room with cautious steps, her purse slung over one shoulder, a travel mug in her hand. Her eyes locked on Isaac, then on me. I stood, unsure what to say. 31 years is a lifetime, and in that moment, I saw the weight of it between us. Isaac looked up. "Cheryl?" Her mouth opened. Closed. "You remember me?" He smiled faintly. "You called me Bug and stole the marshmallows from my cereal." Her eyes filled with tears instantly. She crossed the room in 2 steps and threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. I looked away, not out of distance but reverence. A sacred thing was unfolding. When they finally pulled apart, Cheryl turned to me, cheeks wet. "Mom, I didn't believe it. I told Mark it was a mistake, that it was just some poor man with memory loss." She looked at Isaac again, touched his face. "But it's really you." "It's me," he said. She sat beside me, trembling. "Does this mean he was alive all this time? That we buried someone else?" "Yes," I said quietly. "We buried a stranger." We sat there for a long while, no one saying much. There was nothing to say, really, only to feel. That night, I stood in front of the hospital window, watching the lights of the city dance on the Mississippi River. Isaac was asleep again. Cheryl had gone to a nearby hotel. I whispered his name into the dark. "Isaac." It felt like lighting a candle in a room full of mirrors, everything reflecting, everything flickering, everything finally visible. He was here. He was mine. He was broken, maybe. But he wasn't lost anymore. And neither was I. 2 days later, the DNA results came back. Detective Bourne delivered them himself, in a sealed manila envelope, which he held like it was fragile and sacred all at once. I sat in the small conference room beside Isaac, who still looked pale and tired but more himself than he had since that first day. Cheryl sat on his other side, gripping his hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Bourne didn't open the envelope immediately. Instead, he looked at me straight on, with a weight behind his eyes that told me he understood the stakes. "We already know what the papers will say," he began, his voice low and respectful, "but sometimes you need the world to catch up to the truth your heart already knows." He slid the envelope across the table. I hesitated. My fingers hovered above it. Then I opened it slowly and read the words that confirmed everything. Probability of maternity, 99.9999998%. He was mine. He had always been mine. My hands shook as I passed the report to Cheryl. Isaac didn't ask to see it, he just looked at me, and I nodded. "It's official." "I never doubted you," he said softly. I smiled, even as my eyes blurred. "That makes one of us." Afterward, Bourne stayed behind with a folder of documents. He spread out photographs, old case files, newspaper clippings, missing persons reports. Faces of children, long lost to time, stared up from the table in black and white and faded color. "We believe Marlene may have taken at least 4 children between 1989 and 2001, Bourne said. 2 girls, 2 boys. Only Isaac has resurfaced so far. The others are still out there, or were at one point." He slid a photograph toward Isaac. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, with dark hair and wide eyes. Isaac stared at it for a long moment. "That's Marcus," he said quietly. "He was with me in the beginning. He used to whistle at night when we weren't supposed to talk. Just one note, back and forth." "Do you know what happened to him?" Bourne asked. Isaac's lips parted, but no sound came. His face twisted with effort. Then, one day, he was gone. She said he'd been chosen, that he'd moved on. Moved on. I'd heard that phrase before, pastors at funerals, whispering it like a mercy. But in this context, it curdled something deep in my chest. "She said that to all of us," Isaac added. "Every time one disappeared." Bourne jotted a note. "Do you remember a location? A town name? A sign?" Isaac closed his eyes. "There was a place called Pinewood. She'd always get tense when she talked about it, said we couldn't ever go back there." "Oh." Bourne's eyes narrowed. "There's an abandoned property called Pinewood Retreat in Mississippi. It was once a group home, shut down in '88 after an abuse scandal. No records since. Could be something." My stomach churned. "You're going there?" I asked. Bourne nodded. "We are. With federal agents." Isaac reached out suddenly and touched the photo of Marcus again. "If he's still alive, we have to find him." "We will," Bourne said, voice firm. "We owe that to all of them." "Oh." That evening, Isaac was quieter than usual. He picked at his dinner and stared at the ceiling. I sat by his side, knitting something to keep my hands busy. I was working on a new scarf. This one was green, like the hoodie he'd worn in his favorite childhood picture. "You're making that for me?" he asked suddenly. I smiled. "Of course. I don't remember a lot, but I remember you knitting. You always had yarn in your lap. It made me feel safe." "Oh." I set the scarf down and reached for his hand. "You're safe now." He nodded. Then after a long silence, he said, "Do you think I'll ever be normal again?" My heart cracked. "You were never normal," I said with a smile. "You were special, bright, brave. That hasn't changed. But I don't remember my birthday, or my first bike, or the time I broke my arm playing tag." "I do," I whispered. "And until you remember, I'll hold those memories for both of us." "Oh." He didn't cry, but his eyes glistened. "You always say the right thing," he said. "Only because I've had 31 years to practice," I replied. Later that night, after he was asleep, I stepped out into the hallway. The hospital lights cast long shadows across the floor. I called Cheryl, who had gone back to the hotel to rest. "Do you think he'll ever be able to live a normal life?" I asked her. Her voice came through, quiet and thoughtful. "Mom, there's no such thing as normal anymore, but I think he can live a real one, and maybe that's even better." I smiled. "He wants to find the other children." "Then he should," she said, "and we'll help." I leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Outside the window, New Orleans shimmered in the distance, alive and wide awake, a city full of stories. Some lost, some stolen, but some like ours found again. And tomorrow, we'd take the next step. By Friday morning, the air in New Orleans had turned thick and heavy, that late summer humidity settling over the city like a wool blanket. I stood by the hospital room window, my coffee cooling in my hand, watching people down on the street go about their lives. For them, it was just another day. For me, it was the beginning of something I'd thought impossible, a second chance not just for Isaac, but for the truth. Isaac was dressed and sitting up, looking more alert than ever. He had shaved that morning. Bourne had brought him a disposable razor and a clean t-shirt from the department. It was strange, seeing him this way. Like watching a sketch being filled in slowly, line by line, day by day. "I want to go," he said, out of nowhere. I turned. "Where?" "To Pinewood." He hesitated. "Isaac." "I need to see it," he said. "I need to remember." We were interrupted by a knock at the door. Detective Bourne stepped in, holding a large envelope and a folded state map. He looked serious more than usual. "I think we found something," he said, laying the papers down on the small hospital table. "This is from an old federal file. Pinewood Retreat was more than just a home for troubled youth. It was flagged in 1987 for suspected cult activity. Nothing ever proven, but the structure's still there, about 3 hours north of here, totally abandoned." He paused. "The name Marlene Brooks appears in some visitor logs, as a volunteer. That's the earliest connection we have." I moved closer, my eyes scanning the map. The location was marked with a red circle, deep in rural Mississippi. "There's no official record she ever lived there," Bourne continued, "but if Isaac's memories are accurate, it may have been her base." "I need to see it," Isaac repeated, firmer this time. "If I walk through it, something might come back." "I can't officially advise that," Bourne said, "but I also know memory doesn't work in straight lines. Sometimes it needs a trigger." I looked between them. My instinct screamed to protect him, but my heart, my mother's heart, knew better. He wasn't just trying to remember. He was trying to reclaim something stolen. "I'll go too," I said. "No, Mom," Isaac began. But I raised a hand. "This time you're not doing it alone." We left early the next morning. Bourne led the caravan in an unmarked police SUV. Cheryl stayed behind in New Orleans, promising to monitor from afar, just in case. Isaac sat beside me in the passenger seat of my old silver Ford Fusion, clutching the scarf I'd knit him years ago. I wasn't sure he remembered that detail, but he held onto it like a lifeline. The drive was quiet at first. Trees blurred by on either side of the 2-lane highway, the occasional hawk circling overhead. "Do you remember the road?" I asked softly. He closed his eyes. "I think so." There was a wooden sign, faded, with vines, and the smell, like mold and pine needles. His breath hitched. "And something burning." We turned off the highway onto a gravel road barely wide enough for one car. Branches scraped the sides, the air turning colder despite the sun overhead. Finally, we reached the gate-rusted metal chained shut, with an old hand-painted sign swinging crookedly. "Pinewood Retreat. Est 1972." I stared at it, chills crawling down my spine. Bourne stepped out first, used bolt cutters to break the chain, and waved us through. The main building was large and low, like a forgotten church or a halfway home. Shutters hung off the windows, paint peeled from the siding. Nature had started reclaiming the place, ivy crawling up the walls, squirrels darting between cracks. We stepped inside. The air was thick, stale, and dead quiet. Isaac took slow, careful steps. Every creak of the old floorboards echoed. I stayed behind him, watching his body, his breath, his posture for any sign of recognition. "This was the dining hall," he said suddenly. "There were metal tables. We had to sit in silence. If you talked, she'd make you pray in the corner for an hour." He moved down the hall. There was a room with a piano. She used to sing hymns, not gently like punishment. I exchanged a glance with Bourne, who was recording everything on a body cam. Isaac stopped in front of a door. This was mine. He pushed it open. The room was small, windowless. A twin bed frame. No mattress. Just dust and a few forgotten scraps, an old spoon, a shoelace, something that might have once been a child's drawing. He walked in, sat on the edge of the frame. She painted the walls beige, said color made people emotional, said emotions were dangerous. Then his face changed like a dam breaking. "There was a boy," he whispered. "He wet the bed. She made him sleep outside. It was winter." He looked up at me, eyes wide and hollow. "I don't think he came back." Ugh. I rushed to him, knelt by the bed. "You're here now. You're safe." "But they weren't," he said. Bourne stepped forward. "That's why we're here, to find out who they were and what happened to them." Isaac's hands were shaking. I took them in mine. "I want to help," he said. "I have to." "You will," Bourne replied. "You already are." On the way back to New Orleans, Isaac didn't say much. He stared out the window, silent tears tracing his cheeks. But that night, after dinner, he came to my room and handed me a folded piece of paper. "I drew this when I was 12, he said. "I found it under the floorboard in that room. I must have hidden it." I unfolded it. A picture, crude but clear a house. A tree, 4 stick figures. One had a long scarf, one held a star. "That's you," he said. "And that's me." I nodded, tears falling freely now. Even when he'd been erased, renamed, rewritten, forgotten, he had remembered me. And now, together, we'd begin the work of remembering the others. The following Monday, a courier delivered a box to the hospital's front desk, addressed in careful block letters, "For Detective Alex Bourne, confidential." The nurse called me just after sunrise. I was still in the hospital visitor's room, groggy from a sleepless night, but as soon as I heard those words, I was wide awake. By the time I made it down to the family conference room, Bourne was already there, hunched over the open box like a man digging through buried treasure. Papers, manila folders, photographs, some yellowed with age, some marked Copy in bold red ink spilled across the table. "I got this from a retired social worker in Jackson," he explained, not looking up. Apparently, she kept duplicates of Pinewood's old intake records. Said she didn't trust the system after what happened to the kids back then. I approached slowly, Isaac at my side. His eyes scanned the files with a wary hunger, like a man hoping for answers but afraid of what they might cost. Bourne pulled out a photo. "Recognize this boy?" Isaac stared, then nodded. "That's Jamal." He stuttered. Marlene hated it. Made him wear a rubber band around his wrist, said every time he stuttered he had to snap it. I felt my stomach turn. Bourne flipped through another file. "Here's the intake report. Jamal Watkins, entered Pinewood Retreat in 1991, age 7, ward of the state." He paused. "Reported missing in 1994. No follow-up investigation." "No one looked for him?" I asked, stunned. "Foster system lost track of him," Bourne said grimly. "He was never adopted, slipped through the cracks." Isaac's face hardened. "He didn't slip. They threw him away." Over the next 2 hours we went through more files. Names surfaced like ghosts. Tanya Hill, age 9. Carlos Ramos, age 12. Rebecca Evans, age 8. Each one had a brief entry, sometimes just a page, with intake dates and a few behavioral notes. No discharge dates, no follow-ups. "These weren't just lost children," Bourne said quietly. "They were hidden." "Do we know where Marlene took them?" I asked. He shook his head. "No direct trail yet, but we're cross-referencing locations. There's a theory she operated safe houses, places to re-educate the kids, before splitting them up. So far, 2 suspected properties, both torched years ago." Isaac leaned forward. "I think I remember a red barn, long road, gravel, crows everywhere." "Mississippi has thousands of barns," Bourne said, "but that gives us a region. We'll narrow it." That afternoon, Bourne took Isaac's statement formally voice-recorded, legally documented. It was painful to watch. Isaac hesitated at times, closing his eyes to piece together fragments, whispering details so haunting they left even the detective silent. She made us scrub the floors with toothbrushes, told us pain was part of salvation. She gave us new birthdays. Mine was February 3rd, said it was when I was born again. She kept a ledger, a black book with gold edges, names, numbers, punishments. "Do you remember where the book is?" Bourne asked. Isaac nodded. She kept it in a locked drawer. "Bedroom, top right." It was always with her. "We didn't find any book in Pinewood," Bourne said, "but we'll go back, with ground-penetrating radar if we have to." That night, Isaac barely ate. He sat by the hospital window, knees pulled up to his chest, staring out at the rain. It was the first time I'd seen him regress like that, curl inward, like a boy hiding from monsters no one else could see. I brought him a blanket and sat on the couch across the room. "Tell me what's in your head," I said. He didn't speak at first. Then softly, "I thought if I remembered them it would help, but it just makes me angry. They were kids, like me, and nobody came." I crossed the room and sat beside him, wrapping the blanket over both of us. "You're coming," I said. "For them. You're the one sounding the alarm now." He wiped his eyes. "What if it's too late?" "Then we speak their names," I said. "We remember. We make sure they're not erased." "Oh." He leaned his head on my shoulder, just like he used to when he was small and had nightmares about the dark. Only now, the nightmares were real, and he'd lived inside them for 3 decades. Later that week, Bourne called with an update. The FBI had taken interest. With the new files and Isaac's statement, the Pinewood case was being reopened as a federal investigation. Agents were combing through old government records, searching for funding trails, shell companies, anything that might lead to Marlene's network. "She didn't do this alone," Bourne said. "We think she had help, possibly someone inside the system." A chill ran down my spine. Inside the system. It made sense now how easily she'd vanished, how the children disappeared with no paper trails. Someone had paved her way. "Does that mean she could do it again?" I asked. Bourne didn't answer right away. "We don't think she's active," he said at last. "But we don't know where she is." "Then we have work to do," I replied. And we did. Because justice for Isaac and the others had been sleeping for 31 years. Now it was waking up. By midweek, word of Isaac's return began to spread, not publicly, not yet. But whispers had a way of traveling through the old networks. Retired officers, social workers, even distant family friends began reaching out quietly, offering pieces of memory they thought might help. One call came from a woman named Gloria Watts. She was an aging nurse who'd worked at a now-defunct pediatric clinic in Jackson. She said she remembered seeing a boy, maybe Isaac, come in around 1997, escorted by a woman named Marlene. She called herself Mrs. Keller back then, Gloria told me over the phone. Had this eerie calm about her, like a preacher's wife who'd lost her way. Isaac sat beside me, listening intently. She said the boy had fallen down the stairs. His wrist was broken, but the kid kept looking at me like he wanted to say something. "Did he?" I asked. "No," Gloria said. "But before they left, he dropped a candy wrapper on the floor. On the back, someone had scratched a word with a paper clip." "What word?" I whispered. "Help." My chest tightened. Isaac turned pale. "Why didn't you report it?" I asked, trying to keep the edge from my voice. Gloria sighed. "I was young, new, scared of losing my job. I told my supervisor, and she said, 'They're religious folks. Let it be.' I still think about that boy. I'm sorry." I didn't say anything, because sorry, while honest, was never enough. That night, Isaac sat on his hospital bed, a notebook open in his lap. The pages were filled with fragmented sentences, memories, images, sounds. He was trying to build a timeline. He wanted to understand the shape of his life between 10 years old and now. "I remember a yellow van," he said. "Old. Always smelled like gas and lemons." I blinked. "Gas and lemons?" He nodded. "She used to clean with lemon oil. Said it was godly." I wrote that down. She'd pick us up one by one, never all at once. Always said people would ask questions if there were too many of us together. He stared down at the page. "We were a secret." "Oh, not anymore," I said. "You're not a secret anymore." He looked up at me, and for the first time in days, I saw a spark. A quiet fire rage, maybe, but beneath it, strength. "I want to find her," he said. "I want her to look me in the eye and see what she couldn't destroy." The next morning, we met with a federal agent, Special Agent Martin Graves. Tall, sharp-eyed, mid-60s, with the air of someone who'd seen enough to stop being surprised. He laid out a folder and said, "We have a lead." "Where?" I asked. "There's a community outside Monroe, Louisiana. Quiet, isolated. Locals say there's a woman who calls herself Sister Lenore, runs what she claims is a prayer camp for wayward children." Isaac stiffened. "Lenore," he whispered. "She used that name once, said it was her righteous name." Graves nodded. "We believe Sister Lenore is Marlene Brooks." I gripped the edge of the table. Graves continued, "We're planning a quiet approach. We don't want to spook her. There may be minors involved." "You think she's still doing it?" I asked, horrified. "We don't know, but she's using similar language, similar structures. We can't risk letting it go unchecked." Isaac looked up. "Take me." Graves didn't flinch. "Absolutely not." Isaac leaned forward. "I know her rhythms, her face, her voice. You won't know what to look for. We can't endanger you," Graves said. "You already are," Isaac shot back. "If she disappears again, because no one recognized her in time, what happens to the next kid?" There was a long pause. Then Graves said, "Let me talk to my team." Back in the hospital room, Isaac paced. "She's out there," he muttered, "living like nothing happened. pretending to be holy. After everything she did, I stayed seated, watching him. "You're angry." Has stopped. "Aren't you?" "Yes," I said. "But more than that, I'm terrified, because I just got you back." He sat beside me. "I don't want to lose you again," I whispered. "You won't," he said. "But I need to see it through. I need to stop her, for the kids who didn't get out." I nodded. "Then we do it together." He looked at me, and something in his expression changed, resolve settling into place like armor. For 31 years, I'd mourned a son taken by a stranger. Now, that son was becoming the one who might bring her down. By Friday morning, the decision was made. Special Agent Graves returned to the hospital room with a tight expression and a single line, "We're bringing you in under strict conditions." Isaac sat up straighter. "You'll be there as an observer only," Graves said. "You won't enter the property. You won't speak to her unless we ask you to. We're coordinating with Child Protective Services and have an undercover team already stationed nearby. You'll ride with me." Isaac nodded immediately. "That's all I need." I said nothing, just clutched the arms of my chair tighter. "He's not cleared for discharge yet," I reminded them. "He will be," Graves replied. "We've already spoken to the doctors. His vitals are stable, and we'll have medical staff nearby." Isaac looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the child he once was, the one who used to beg to sleep with the hallway light on. "I'll be okay," he said gently. "You better be," I whispered back. We left New Orleans just past dawn the next day. Graves drove a dark SUV, Isaac in the front seat beside him, me in the back, a federal nurse beside me with a black bag of medical supplies at her feet. The air was thick with anticipation and a strange, tense hope. The address was in Ouachita Parish, nestled at the end of a dirt road off a stretch of highway where the trees grew too close and the map barely acknowledged anything existed. As we approached, Graves pointed to a weathered wooden sign tucked behind overgrown brush. "Lenore's Prayer Retreat, a sanctuary of peace." A sanctuary. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Instead, I gripped my hands in my lap and stared straight ahead. As we pulled up to the property, I counted 3 structures: a large main house, a smaller cabin, and what looked like a repurposed barn. A high fence ran along the east side, not quite high enough to be official, but just enough to say, "Keep out." 2 other cars were already parked nearby. One belonged to CPS, the other to an undercover agent who nodded subtly as we approached. From the moment we stepped out, Isaac's body changed. His shoulders tensed, his eyes sharpened, and his breath slowed like he was bracing for impact. "She's here," he said. "I can feel it." The door to the main house opened. A woman stepped out, dressed in a long beige dress, her silver blonde hair tied in a tight bun. She walked slowly, her hands folded in front of her like a hymn about to be sung. Her face had aged, but the bones were the same: sharp cheekbones, narrow eyes, thin lips that curled into a benevolent smile that made my skin crawl. "Marlene." She looked at Graves. "Can I help you, officer?" "Ma'am," he said calmly. "We're here to follow up on reports of unlicensed childcare on your property." "There must be some mistake," she said smoothly. "This is a spiritual retreat. We offer guidance, not care. We're protected under religious exemption." Graves showed her his badge. "We still need to ask a few questions." Marlene nodded. "Of course. Come inside." Isaac remained at the car, out of sight. But then something happened. As Marlene turned to lead Graves toward the door, she glanced back just once, just briefly, and her eyes landed on Isaac. She froze. It lasted only a second. But I saw it. The tightening of her jaw, the flash of fear, the recognition. Isaac saw it too. "She knows," he said, his voice cold. "She knows who I am." Inside the house, agents moved quickly. They didn't wait for an invitation. Within 15 minutes, CPS had 3 minors in protective custody, 2 girls, 1 boy, all under the age of 12. They looked confused, scared, but unharmed. One of them had bruises on her arms. Another kept flinching at loud noises. Marlene stood calmly in the living room, hands still folded, as if she were welcoming parishioners to service. "You can't take them," she said. "They're under spiritual guardianship. Their parents signed. Those signatures were forged. Graves cut in, "and the state revoked your religious exemption 2 years ago." For the first time, her face cracked. "You don't understand," she said, voice rising. "They came from chaos. I gave them peace. I gave them purpose." Graves didn't respond. He simply turned to the lead agent and said, "Take her in." When the cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, I expected her to struggle. But she didn't. She turned her head toward the window, toward the car where Isaac sat and stared. Not at him. Through him, like he was a mirror she refused to look directly into. "You were weak," she said, her voice low, almost intimate. "I tried to fix you. You were unfixable." Isaac didn't flinch. He opened the door slowly, stepped out, and stood there as they led her past. "I remember everything now," he said, "and so will the world." She didn't reply. They loaded her into the cruiser, and for the first time in over 3 decades, the woman who stole my son was behind bars. That night, we drove back in silence. No cheers, no celebration, just the weight of everything we'd found and everything we hadn't. Isaac sat beside me, his eyes red but clear. "It's not over," he said. "There are still more." "I know," I whispered. "But this time we're not alone." And this time, we weren't. The next day, the air in New Orleans felt different, cleaner somehow. Maybe it was just me, finally breathing without the weight of dread in my lungs. Maybe it was because Marlene Brooks, the woman who stole my son and others like him, had finally been arrested. 31 years too late, but arrested nonetheless. Still, there was no time to rest. Graves had been clear. This was just the beginning. There were questions Marlene wouldn't answer, aliases she wouldn't confirm, and children who remained unaccounted for. The case wasn't solved, it had only broken open. Isaac and I spent the morning in the hospital waiting room while the agents processed Marlene's property in Louisiana. He was quiet, flipping through an old photo album I had brought from home. Pictures of him and Cheryl as kids, our first Christmas together in the old house, the backyard birthday party with the clown that terrified him. "She said memories were poison," he murmured. "But these don't hurt, not like I thought they would." "They're yours," I said. "No one gets to take them anymore." That afternoon, Agent Graves returned with news. "We're heading back to Pinewood tomorrow," he said, dropping a file onto the table. "We received court authorization for a full excavation of the main building." "Why?" Isaac asked. Graves opened the folder. "After we arrested Marlene, one of the kids in her current retreat told CPS she used to keep things hidden in the walls, notes, punishments, lessons. We think she may have been doing the same thing in Pinewood all along." My stomach turned. "What kind of things?" I asked. Graves didn't answer directly. "We'll know tomorrow." Aini. At sunrise, we returned to the Pinewood property. It looked the same gray, lifeless, swallowed by vines, but it felt different. No longer just a place of loss, but one of reckoning. A forensic team had already begun scanning the interior with specialized equipment. Isaac stood beside Graves, watching as they peeled back sections of drywall, revealing old insulation and mold-stained studs. Then, just after 10 a.m., one of the techs called out, "We've got something." Everyone rushed over. In the far corner of what had once been Isaac's room, they found a sealed compartment tucked behind a false panel. Inside was a tin lunchbox, rusted, dented, covered in dust. The kind a child might carry to school. Graves handed it to Isaac. "You sure?" he asked. Isaac nodded. "It's mine." He opened it slowly. Inside were 5 folded notes, a button, and a crayon drawing. The notes were yellowed but intact, each written in different handwriting. Each one started with a name. Jamal, Tonya, Rebecca, Carlos, Caleb. Isaac's hands trembled. He unfolded the first one and read aloud. "If you find this, it means I didn't make it out. But please remember me. My name is Jamal Watkins. I was born in Atlanta. My favorite color is red. I miss my mom." I covered my mouth, unable to speak. He read another. "My name is Tanya Hill. I want to be a nurse. I like stars. Please tell my sister I love her." Tears streamed down his face. He held up the crayon drawing. It was crude stick figures again, but labeled this time. A group of 5 standing under a tree. One of the figures had a crown drawn above their head. "That's Jamal," Isaac whispered. "He used to say he'd be king of the woods one day." Graves crouched beside him. "These are testimonies. We can use them." "Use them?" I asked. "For what?" "To reopen the cold cases. With Isaac's witness account and these notes, we can tie Marlene directly to their disappearances." Isaac stared at the tin box. "They wanted to be remembered, that's all. And now they will be," Graves said. That evening, back in the hotel, Isaac didn't eat. He sat in silence, the lunchbox beside him on the nightstand, as if guarding the voices inside. "Do you think they knew I'd find it?" he asked me. "I think they hoped," I said, "and that's almost the same thing." He looked at me, eyes raw with grief, and something deeper gratitude maybe, or purpose. "I want to speak," he said suddenly. "Speak? To the press. To the families. I want to tell the truth, not just about me but about them." He hesitated. "Are you ready for that?" "I have to be," he said. "Someone has to say their names." The next morning, Isaac gave his first interview. It was quiet, recorded in a private room. No flashing cameras, just a voice recorder, Graves, and a representative from the district attorney's office. He spoke for nearly an hour, recounting the names, the rituals, the rules, the punishments. He held up the notes, one by one, and then he said, "They weren't just lost kids. They were smart, funny, brave. They had dreams, and someone decided those dreams didn't matter. But I remember them, and now you will too." When he finished, there was silence. Then Graves stood, walked over, and shook his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. As they packed up the recorder, Isaac turned to me. "That's one weight off," he said. I nodded. "One down. More to go." And he smiled softly, but fully for the first time. 3 days after the interview, my phone rang just after sunset. I had just brewed a pot of chamomile tea when the caller ID flashed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Anita Holloway. I stared at it, my heart skipping. Anita had been one of the few mothers who used to wait outside the community center with me during the summer reading programs. Her son Marcus had been in the same playgroup as Isaac. I answered slowly. "Anita?" There was a pause. Then her voice, thinner, older, but unmistakable. "It's really him, isn't it?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. "Yes," I whispered, "it's him." She broke into sobs, and I cried with her. The next day, 6 mothers met in the back room of a Baptist church in Baton Rouge. Anita was there, her hands trembling as she held a faded photograph of Marcus. There was also Yvonne, whose daughter Rebecca had vanished in 1994, and Lorraine, whose twin nephews, Caleb and Isaiah, were among the earliest Pinewood entries. Others came from out-of-state Florida, Arkansas, even Tennessee. They carried photos and grief, diaries and boxes of yellowing papers. Some brought court documents, others brought only memories. Graves and a representative from the DOJ stood at the back, giving them space, but listening. Isaac stood in the center. He was nervous, I could feel it in the way his hands fidgeted, how his eyes avoided contact at first. But when he finally spoke, the room stilled. "I was with your children," he said, "and I remember them." He pulled the tin lunchbox from his backpack and set it gently on the table. "They left messages. Some of them knew they might never get out, but they wanted to be remembered." Anita reached for it with shaking fingers. Isaac continued. "They were funny, smart, brave. We made games in the dark. We told stories to stay sane. We kept each other alive." He paused. "Your children saved me." Yvonne stood, her hand covering her mouth. "You knew Rebecca?" He nodded. "She used to sing when we weren't supposed to talk. She said music made her brave." Yvonne collapsed into a chair, weeping openly. No one rushed to stop her. We all let her grieve. It was the first time, in decades, someone had confirmed her daughter had been real and seen. After the gathering, Graves approached me outside. "We're going to open a public tip line," he said. "We'll keep the names sealed, but we'll invite others to come forward. With the notes, your son's testimony, and support from the families, we're building a case that could extend beyond Marlene." I looked at him. "You think she had help?" "I think she had a network," he said darkly, "and we're starting to see the outline of it." I shivered. "Do you think this goes up?" I asked. "Like state level? Federal?" "We'll find out," he replied. That night, Isaac and I returned to our hotel room. We were both drained. The air felt heavy, like the sky itself had witnessed too much sorrow. I poured 2 glasses of ginger ale, handed one to him. "How are you?" I asked. He thought for a long time. "Lighter," he said, "but also angrier." I understood. The more we uncovered, the more I saw how deep the injustice had gone. So many children, so little accountability. He looked down at the photo album again. This time, he pointed to a picture of himself in overalls, sitting on the front porch with Cheryl. "Was I loud?" he asked. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "As a kid, did I laugh a lot?" I smiled. "Oh, honey, you were noise itself. You laughed so hard you made the neighbor's dog bark." He smiled. "For real. I want to find that part of me again," he said. "You will," I promised, piece by piece. He leaned his head on my shoulder. "I still feel like I'm waking up," he whispered. "Then keep waking," I said. "The world needs you wide awake now." Later that week, Cheryl arrived from New Orleans. She entered the room like a breeze of warmth, wrapping Isaac in a hug so tight, I thought neither of them would let go. "I brought you something," she said. She pulled out a small box. Inside was a hand-stitched journal with Isaac's name embroidered on the front. Below it, a phrase, "Remember loudly." Ugh. He ran his fingers over the threads. "I'm not done remembering," he said softly. "Not by a long shot." And we weren't. 3 days later, we got a name. It came from a nurse in Little Rock, Arkansas, retired now, but still haunted by a boy she treated in 1995. The boy had a broken collarbone and burned scars. He'd been brought in by a man who called himself Pastor Gregory. No church name, no paperwork, just the boy, quiet and wide-eyed, who wouldn't say where he came from. The nurse reported it back then, but nothing was done. "The man had papers," she said he was a foster guardian, but his eyes, I knew something wasn't right. Graves had the team run a background search. Gregory didn't exist. But the car he'd driven, a powder blue station wagon, was registered to a David Harwood, a former counselor from a state-run youth camp, the same camp that had quietly donated staff to Pinewood in the early 90s. The next morning, we were on the road again, this time to Biloxi, Mississippi. David Harwood lived in a retirement community just off the coast. From the outside, it looked idyllic, palm trees swaying, golf carts humming along paved paths, an endless parade of beige and sunshine. But when we walked into the community center where Harwood volunteered, I could feel Isaac tense beside me. "That's him," he whispered, pointing toward a tall, gaunt man arranging folding chairs near the window. He had a limp. He used to whistle before he punished us. Graves exchanged a glance with his partner. "You're sure?" Isaac nodded, a hard line in his jaw. We didn't confront him immediately. The agents wanted it clean, by the book. They needed a warrant, a legal approach. But as we waited in a nearby cafe, sipping bitter coffee and watching the windows for signs of movement, I could feel the tension in Isaac rising like a storm. "What if he runs?" he asked. "He won't," Graves said. "We have eyes on him. He's being watched." "But not stopped," Isaac snapped. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "Hey," I said gently. "You found him. That's already a victory." He exhaled, but his hands were shaking. By sunset, Harwood was in custody. Agents found evidence in his apartment: photographs, ID tags, even a list of names. One of the names matched a child still listed as missing in Louisiana. He didn't resist arrest. Didn't even deny it. "You people don't understand," he said as they let him out. "We were saving them, giving them order, God's order." Isaac stood across the street, his hands clenched into fists, watching. Graves later told us that Harwood admitted he'd worked with Marlene for almost 10 years. Pinewood had been their base, but they moved children through various stations when they got too old or started resisting. They called it recleansing. I couldn't speak when I heard that. I felt like my lungs had folded inward. Isaac turned to me in the hotel that night and said, "He doesn't get to fade into retirement, not after what he did." "He won't," I said. "Not on our watch." 2 days later, Isaac returned to the Baton Rouge Mothers Group. This time, he brought the list Graves had compiled from Harwood's files. It included over 30 names, some already known, some new, all of them pieces in the puzzle. As he read them aloud, the mothers held hands. Some closed their eyes. Others wept openly. When he finished, Isaac said, "You gave birth to them. I remembered them. Now the world will know them." Afterward, Anita approached him quietly. "My Marcus," she whispered. "Was he scared?" Isaac looked at her gently. "Yes, but he was also funny. He told knock-knock jokes every night. He said he'd be a detective one day, just like on TV." She smiled through her tears. "That sounds like him," she said. That night, Cheryl and I sat with Isaac in the hotel room. He was quieter than usual. "It's not just justice," he said suddenly. "It's memory. That's what we're fighting for, so people don't forget what they lived through." I nodded. "And so no one ever says again, 'That couldn't happen here.'" He turned to me. "I want to go back to the church," he said. "To Pinewood. One last time." "Why?" "To bury them," he said. "Properly." I didn't ask what he meant. I just said, "Then we'll go." "Oh." Before bed, he pulled out the journal Cheryl gave him, "Remember loudly," and wrote a single line. "Justice's memory, written in ink the world can't wash away." We returned to Pinewood on a gray morning that felt like it had waited 30 years just to weep. The sky hung low, pregnant with rain, and the wind carried a strange stillness as if the land itself held its breath. Isaac walked ahead of us, steady, calm, his journal tucked under one arm and the rusted lunchbox in the other. Graves had given us full access to the site now, since the forensics teams had finished their sweeps. The building was cordoned off with yellow tape, but no longer needed watching. Today wasn't about investigation. It was about mourning and remembering. He stopped in the old courtyard, the place where the children used to line up for morning prayers, for punishments, for silence. The cracked stones beneath our feet bore no names, no plaque, no sign that lives had ever passed through here. "I want to change that," Isaac said. He opened the lunchbox and carefully laid out the 5 letters. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out something new. 10 smooth stones, each one etched with a name. He'd carved them himself over the past few nights with a pocket tool Cheryl had given him. Hamal, Tonya, Carlos, Rebecca, Caleb, and 5 more. "Not everyone left notes," he said quietly, "but I remember them. I remember the way they looked at me when it was dark, the way we held hands when the others cried." He began placing the stones in a circle, just off the main path. No graves, no bodies, just memory. I stepped beside him and laid a candle in the center. Cheryl knelt and placed a small framed sign that read, "They were here, they were loved, and they will not be forgotten." We stood in silence for several minutes, the wind rustling the leaves, the occasional distant rumble of thunder moving somewhere over the bayou. Isaac read the names aloud again, slow and steady, his voice cracking but never faltering. "I don't know where your bodies rest," he said, "but today your names are buried in honor." He knelt beside the stones, pressed his palm against the earth, and whispered something I didn't hear. But I felt it. All of it. That evening, back in New Orleans, we gathered in a small community library near the French Quarter for the first Vigil of Voices, an event organized by Graves' team and the DOJ. Families were invited to share stories, survivors to speak their truths, and names to be read into the record. Isaac was the final speaker. He stood before the modest crowd of 50 or so people, mothers, uncles, teachers, former caseworkers, and strangers who simply cared and held up his journal. "I used to believe I was a mistake," he said, "that something in me made Marlene choose me, made her break me. I thought surviving meant I had to forget." He looked out across the room. "But I was wrong. Surviving means you remember, you hold the names, you share the stories, and you refuse to let silence win." He opened the journal and read, "To the boys who sang in the dark, to the girls who made paper dolls out of scraps, to the ones who waited and the ones who didn't make it. I remember you. I am your echo, and I will be loud." The room fell silent. Then someone began to clap. Then everyone. Afterward, as we were packing up, an older man in a corduroy blazer approached Isaac. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes were rimmed red. "You mentioned Caleb," he said softly. "He was my cousin's boy. I always wondered what happened to him. Thank you for remembering him." Isaac nodded, his voice thick. He wanted to be a magician, said he could disappear if he held his breath long enough. The man chuckled, then wept. Isaac placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "He never disappeared, not really." Later that night, back at the hotel, we sat quietly on the balcony. The city buzzed faintly below music, sirens, laughter, the whole messy life of a place that refused to sleep. Isaac turned to me. "Do you think they would have been proud of me?" I looked at him, at the lines of grief and strength on his face, and I said, "I think they are proud of you. Right now. Somewhere." He didn't cry. He didn't smile. But he nodded. And in the quiet, I watched my son take another step toward becoming whole. 3 months later, the courthouse in Baton Rouge was packed. It was a soft, humid morning, and the line to enter wrapped around the block. Survivors, families, journalists, protesters. People who'd seen Isaac's interview, read the names, followed every detail since the arrest. Some came with signs that said, "Justice for the Forgotten." Others simply stood, arms crossed, faces solemn. Inside, the courtroom was quiet but tense. Isaac sat beside me on the front bench, dressed in a simple gray suit. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, knuckles white. Cheryl sat behind us, a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. At the defendant's table sat Marlene Brooks, flanked by her attorneys. She wore a beige cardigan, her silver hair pinned back, and her expression unreadable. When she glanced at Isaac, there was no flinch this time. No recognition. Just cold calculation. The judge entered. The jury filed in. And the trial began. The prosecution started with the photos, the rusted lunchbox, the carved stones, the children's notes. Then came testimony from federal agents, forensic experts, CPS investigators, and former nurses who had remained silent for decades. They spoke of odd records, forged documents, sudden transfers. The term used repeatedly was systemic failure. On day 3, Isaac was called to the stand. He stood slowly, walked past Marlene without a glance, and took the oath. The room held its breath. He told them about Pinewood, about the cleansings, the silence rules, the nights spent locked in a cellar with no food. He told them about Jamal's jokes, Rebecca's humming, Tanya's scraped knees. He held up the drawing the stick figures under the tree and said, "We were more than victims, we were children, and she stole us." The defense tried to rattle him. They implied his memories were manipulated, that trauma blurred fact, that maybe he just wanted to believe he'd found meaning in a painful past. Isaac didn't waver. He looked the defense attorney in the eye and said, "If your child disappeared, would you believe the man who found her was just confused?" The courtroom stilled. Even the judge looked down for a moment, visibly moved. The defense then called Marlene to testify. Her voice was calm, her demeanor saintly. She called the children lost sheep, claimed she was helping, said no one had ever been harmed intentionally. She spoke in parables. She smiled too much. When asked about the forged records, she blamed clerical error. When asked about the notes, she suggested the children invented stories because television has poisoned young minds. When asked about Isaac, she looked directly at him and said, "I don't remember him." Isaac didn't react, but I saw his jaw tighten. I reached for his hand. He squeezed it back. The closing arguments were powerful. The prosecution painted a picture of hidden abuse, a system too blind to act, and a woman who wore faith like a costume while inflicting lifelong wounds. The defense leaned on doubt. "How can you convict based on memory?" they asked. "On broken records and lost time?" But the jury had seen enough. They deliberated for just under 5 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty, on all counts. There was no cheer, just a collective exhale. Marlene was remanded immediately. She showed no emotion, just sat, hands folded, like she was waiting for someone to hand her a hymnal. Isaac didn't speak until we were outside, blinking in the sudden sunlight. "She didn't cry," he murmured. "She never had to," I said. "The rest of us did that for her." He looked at the crowd gathered on the steps, strangers hugging, news cameras flashing, women clutching framed photos of missing children. And then he said, "It's not over." "I know," I replied, "but it's a beginning." That night we lit candles, one for each name on the lunchbox notes, one for each mother who never got a call, and one for Isaac, who came back not just as a survivor, but as a witness. The old community center on South Carondelet had been abandoned for years, its windows dust-covered, the roof patched with duct tape and hope. But to Isaac, it was the perfect place. It took months of red tape, city permits and quiet donations. Graves pulled strings. Cheryl fundraised. I made calls I never thought I'd make again, teachers, church ladies, old friends who remembered. By spring, the space had been transformed. What once held gym mats and dusty trophies now held testimony. The walls bore framed copies of the children's notes, Jamal's, Tanya's, Carlos's. Beneath each was a photograph of them as best we could find or recreate. Artist renderings, yearbook photos, even sketches Isaac described. We called it the Museum of Echoes. And it opened with no fanfare, just an unlocked door, soft music playing, and a sign out front. Here, the forgotten are remembered. Isaac stood in the center on opening day, arms crossed, watching the visitors move from exhibit to exhibit. Some wept quietly. Others stood frozen, reading the notes over and over, mouthing the words like prayers. A woman approached him. Her name was Lena. She was in her 60s, with a voice that trembled but eyes that held fire. "I remember Pinewood," she said. "My niece went there. We were told it was a religious school. They said she ran away." Isaac nodded. "She was quiet," Lena whispered. "But she loved poetry. She used to write little verses on the back of cereal boxes." He opened his journal, flipped to a page filled with names and memories. "Do you remember her name?" he asked. "Avonlea," she said. "Avonlea Boone." Isaac wrote it down. "She'll have a stone," he said. Lena touched his arm. "You've made something sacred here." He smiled. "They deserved that." Later that evening, after the last guests had left, we sat in the museum alone, just me, Isaac, and Cheryl. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and lilacs, a tribute to Rebecca, who once told Isaac lilacs made her feel like clouds were smiling. He stared at one of the display cases, the lunchbox, now encased in glass, with a single light above it. Beside it, a typed placard that read, "These were their voices. These were their hopes. This is the echo they left behind and the one we now carry." "I didn't think I'd live long enough to do this," he said. "You didn't just live," I said. "You rebuilt," Cheryl added softly. "You gave them their names back." He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. "It's not justice," he said. "Not fully, but it's a place to begin grieving, and a place to stop pretending they were just statistics." I reached for his hand, and we sat in the silence, the good kind, the kind where nothing needs fixing, only feeling. The next day, letters began arriving. From all over the country, former foster kids, caseworkers, grandmothers who'd raised their nieces after social services gave up. One man from Idaho who'd seen Isaac's vigil speech said he remembered a place like Pinewood but colder. He hadn't spoken about it in 40 years. We printed every letter, anonymized when needed, and gave them a wall in the museum, the Wall of Whispers. Isaac read each one. Some he cried over, some he replied to, and some he simply pinned beside a small hand-carved sign that read, "I believe you." As summer approached, a journalist from The Atlantic visited and published a full-length feature on Isaac's journey. The piece was called Buried Twice: How a Forgotten Son Became the Voice of a Lost Generation. It went viral. Donations poured in. Schools booked field trips. A documentary crew offered a partnership. Isaac refused the first 3 requests but accepted the last. "They need to hear the voices," he told the filmmakers. "Not just mine, theirs." One night, as we locked up the museum, Isaac lingered by the main display again. He stood silently for several minutes, then whispered, "I wonder if they'd forgive me." "For what?" I asked. "For surviving when they didn't?" I stepped beside him. "They would have wanted you to," I said. "And they would have wanted you to sing." He looked at me. "I can't sing." "You used to," I smiled. "Off-key. Loud. Beautiful." And finally, after all the noise, the grief, the fury, he laughed. That loud, wild, echoing laugh I hadn't heard since he was 10. And I laughed with him, because we'd carried the silence long enough. It was autumn again when the final piece arrived. A package, unmarked except for a return address in Oklahoma. Inside was a faded photograph, a church program dated 1991, and a torn page from a Bible with a single name written in looping cursive. Isaiah L. Boone. The handwriting matched one of the letters found in Isaac's lunchbox. Isaac stared at it for a long time, tracing the letters like a blind man reading scripture by touch. He was real, he said quietly. Isaiah was real. Cheryl read the church program aloud. It was a service for a youth retreat guest choir, held at a rural church 2 hours outside Tulsa. Listed in the back, under temporary guardians and program chaperones, was a name we hadn't seen in months. David Harwood. It all fit. One more child, lost in the shuffle, swallowed by the lies of religion and red tape. But now, finally, named. Isaiah L. Boone. That weekend, Isaac carved one last stone. He took his time, no rush, no pressure. Just careful, deliberate motion. I watched him from the back porch as the autumn leaves spun around him like confetti in reverse, falling instead of rising. He didn't speak much that week. Just wrote. In the mornings, I'd find pages torn from his journal, little thoughts left around the house like breadcrumbs. Hope is the bone we throw into the dark, hoping it returns as light. They weren't orphans. They were stolen. My name was taken, but I took it back. On Saturday, we returned to Pinewood. The field was quieter, now emptier, somehow but peaceful. The stone circle had grown to over a dozen names, families who'd come after seeing the news, survivors who reached out with memory and grief. Each name carved by Isaac, each one placed with care. He added Isaiah's last, placing it just to the east of Caleb's. Then we lit the candles. As we stood in silence, Cheryl took a photo of the circle. She framed it later with a caption that now hangs in the Museum of Echoes. This is not a graveyard. It is a beginning. That winter, the museum received state funding. A grant to expand, offer trauma-informed education for social workers, and host survivor-led panels. Isaac began leading workshops, always introducing himself the same way. My name is Isaac Monroe. I was taken. I survived. I remember. And the room would go quiet. Then filled with nods, tears, and sometimes for the first time in years, laughter. Real laughter. The kind that shakes you loose from grief. I, too, found a new rhythm. I started writing again, not just emails and petitions, but letters to mothers like me. I called it the Second Voice Project, for every mother who never got a second chance, for everyone who did. The first line I always wrote was, "You didn't imagine it. It happened. And you are not alone." One night, sitting by the fire, Isaac turned to me. "Do you remember what you used to tell me when I was little?" he asked. I smiled. "I told you a lot of things. You said, no matter where you go, your name will always find you." He looked into the flames. "I think I believe that now." Then he added, almost like a prayer, "And maybe now they're finally home." The Museum of Echoes stands today not just as a memorial but as a promise. A promise that no story is too old to matter, no voice too small to echo, and no child ever truly forgotten if someone, somewhere, remembers their name.